Hi, I'm Heath Weaver. I'm the remote executive, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about a topic that I had discussed in a previous video, and that was this previous video. I talked just about organizing people instead of just around like an ultimate outcome or around just generally aligning on what they want, rather on the specifics of the outputs of their work. And I think I've used a little overly complicated language in that. I think that's something that's been interesting when listening to Hormozi, of just trying to simplify how you talk about things. And I think in an executive level, often things are more sophisticated in bigger businesses and in things that are more difficult. But the businesses I've been running in the last while, they're not that sophisticated of businesses, and so those things aren't that necessary to try to overcomplicate. Um, and what it reminded me of was the Grove book by High Output Management, which I had read some years ago, and the the conversation that or the things that Hormozi was discussing that kind of aligned with how I've been managing things for quite a long time, which was this focus on inputs and outputs. And that's something that I think it's back in the early 80s when Grove wrote that book, that became like quite an important Andrew Grove, yeah, that became it became an important way to think about managing work at that point. But I think even before that kind of thing had been talked about quite a bit by a number of different authors, and then as early as like kind of the early authors when the what was there's a the name escapes me. I have to look that up. There are some early authors that were writing about how to just like organize a factory, and when they started to move to an actual like factory setup of things, to try to have like specialization in what people are doing. And so that kind of thinking about the processes of how we do something went from an individual or like a group of individuals kind of like just figuring it out, or having a general idea of what they're doing and then putting it together, to like really trying to like isolate every aspect of a conveyor belt, or I mean of a factory, and how you actually assemble something. In when you're dealing with remote work and when you're dealing with remote workers, the idea of let's say a cloud factory, I think that's something that's been referred to. It's not that far off from that kind of thing, and that's one of the things that I think that is interesting about remote work, is that if you want to do it well, you actually need to think of it more like a factory than you would in a traditional office space for thought work. And that's just because you just got the trade-off, and that's something that I've felt for quite a long time. And I think one of the key learnings that I found is that you've got to trade off the speed of communication for like strong organization, like really being very, very well organized. You can of course do both, but typically like when you can speak to each other and speak a lot and move fast, it often doesn't make as much sense to really organize things as strongly as when you're working with the remote workforce, where you just can't speak as much. It's just not possible. There might be some organizations that maybe a small size or something that are basically on Zoom or on Slack or something, like in a video environment all day, and they're just kind of like talking to each other. I just doubt that. If it exists, it's such an outlier. The big vast majority of remote workers are speaking to their colleagues at like just a fraction of the somebody in an office. So this organization, the need for organization is there because of the nature of like the how little that you speak together. So your work needs to be quite organized. So when you're looking, when you have a fairly good idea of what you're doing, and you're not trying to like work it all out, and so you kind of know how you deliver something, then at that point, then remote work can be very, very beneficial to slot people into the different parts of it, to really understand that they need to deliver certain inputs, and that needs to then result in certain outputs. And so I want to have a bit more practical view on this, or more, talk about it a little bit more practically. So the leading indicator part of thing is, it's a good way to think of it from a managerial standpoint when you're looking at reports and trying to decide what, kind of how things are moving along, to think of those as these are the things which lead to the result. Great. But it's just inputs, and then there's transformation on that, then and there's outputs. And when you're looking at those inputs, that's the thing that you really want to set up for the different employees that you have, however you're working with people, whether it's freelancers or even for yourself. So let me just take an example of hiring people, because this was an area. This is one of the first areas when I come into a company. Like I'll almost always just start with the hiring process of things, because this is almost always really poorly done in most companies. So if you look at the hiring process generally, there's a number of different inputs that need to happen inside of there. There's a number of different phases of things. Is you need to source candidates, and you need to sort through the ones that you source, and then you need to decide which ones you're going to keep and which ones you're going to not keep. You need to communicate with them, whether you're keeping them or not, as quickly as you can. Then you need to move forward with interviews, scheduling people, scheduling internal people to interview them, and then moving on to offers and things like that. So, like each one of those things, it's actually fairly straightforward set of things. But there's a lot of inputs that need to happen. Like, let's just say that you're dealing with the sourcing part of things. So you need to write a job ad, and then you need to post that to different job boards, and then you need to receive all of these resumes and CVs and things. And then filter on those. So if you just look at like the inputs of that, so if you're really at the start, if you, let's say you've not done this before, or let's say you've hired actually quite a few people, but it's always just been a fairly disorganized way of doing things. Like if you're hiring for one position, well, let me back up just first of all, is when we want to talk about these inputs, we want to just talk about units of input. And the units of input, you think about that in terms of the unit part. And that even though different units have different levels of work that go into them, you want to try to make them somewhat equivalent. You don't want to make units too much a discrepancy of how much work it takes to deliver them. But like still there might be some kind of vast differences in the amount of units that one person can provide. But within a particular system, the units are they're going to be consistent between one person and another. So let's go back to that hiring thing. So let's say if you're just hiring for one job, like the creation of a job description, that can be like a pretty big unit. Like that can take quite a lot of work to actually sit down with yourself or somebody else or a person in the company or a manager and get them to actually write out what needs to be done inside of that job. So you could kind of expect that could take like several days of work just to get one job description really like dialed in. So that's one input into that process. Now, another input, which is an important one, is if you haven't done it in the past, it can take quite a bit of time, is like researching and figuring out like where you're going to post that. Because there's a lot of job boards, and there's different costs related to them. There's different qualities to those. So just doing what we always call the tech stack, which would be like, making a list of all the different job boards and then like grading them, what features do they have and what's good and bad, and then giving a grading on those kind of things. Then that tech stack like will serve as a future reference. And then it might just be that posting to each of them, which takes time. You do have some that will post to many different boards, but like if you generally have to go through and post to each one of them, that's like a unit of work inside of there. It's not a long one typically, but finding it is a separate input than posting it. So it's like once you've got, from a company and a system standpoint, when you think about the pipeline for hiring, it's like there's parts of it that you have to figure out, and then like once you solve them, you can just like build on that. But if a person every time is like redoing this work, and if you're just, let's say, trusting them, it's the wrong way to say it, I don't know the right way to say that, but like if you're just saying, oh, okay, great, do your job and do your thing, then it's like they can just relearn that every single time. And then if you try to create another pipeline for hiring, or you're bringing another person, like they're going to figure that out in a totally different way, and just like there's a lot of wasted time in there. But if you think of it of a pipeline, if you think of it more of like that factory standpoint, it's like, okay, one thing we know we need to do is we need to create a job description. Like, so we always create those the same way. They're going to have the same structure. And it's like, you don't want to innovate too much on that one. I'm going to make another video at some point about how the whole job hiring thing is completely destroyed now. Like the whole idea of hiring people off of a CV with a few bullet points is just completely stupid in a remote work where you've got like, you're recording everything you're doing, and you've got like all these, you've got so much information like about a person that you can get. Like just trying to base this on like this piece of paper is just, to me, is beyond stupid at this point. But it's just like we have not invented a better way yet. But anyway, like that's what it is. Like a job description is, you know, you have a certain structure to it. Like it's going to be the same. Whoever comes in, they can make a few little improvements to it, I'm sure, but like generally, like just do it like that, and then that's solved. So, and that's one unit, and this is how we do the unit, and this is the quality score we give to that unit. Then with actually posting of different places, well, those are all different units, and you can add. I mean, that's one unit for each one posting, but you can add you can take some time to research new ones, and you know, you could probably improve the quality on those units over time. And if you've read the Andy Grove book, like you understand like this idea of having quality, an aspect of quality to like everything, every input that you deliver, because that's like, you can't just have units. You have to have a way to determine whether it's a good unit, an acceptable unit. So anyway, you continue to go through that, and the next thing might be that you post those, and then you're going to measure maybe how many CVs are coming in. So it might be you might like the behavior that would change depending on how many CVs come in is going to be, well, if you get none, then like that's a really good indicator that the quality of your job boards is poor, or the quality of your description is poor. So maybe like if you don't put how much money people are going to make, like we saw a big decline over the last 3 or 4 years when we weren't putting the amount of money, like the salary on the position. Like we saw a big decline. It used to be much higher, but then it just became more and more often that people are putting it, and so less people would even respond if you just left it nothing, if you didn't mention it. So like that could be like, okay, that's actually a really good indicator on the quality of one of those things, and then you have to kind of test and work out which one it is. Is it the place you're posting it, or is it the position? Try to isolate that. But so you have it there. It's not an input, but it's something which will change the behavior of these other two inputs. So from there, then you start to get all the CVs coming in, and then you have to like go through that. And so figuring out like how you're going to evaluate that, like whether you're going to use a system, whether you're going to use like an AI system, whether you're going to have somebody read through each of them. Like what are the criteria for that particular position, and then that's like a really good, working out that problem is one that should inform the job description, because it's like, okay, next time around when we make a job description, let's think more specifically on how we're going to evaluate those CVs when they come in, like what kind of things are important for them. You may not have known that when you first put it together, but when you start getting 1,000 CVs that you have to go through, and you see that 90% of them are people who don't have any experience with that position, and who don't even have who've not done anything even in the spectrum of what you want them to do. Like maybe you want somebody who has some experience writing copy, and these are all people who've basically been, let's say, waiters or something. So that skill is just not transferable. Like maybe they do well in a people skill, but you don't have any indication that they're going to do well in that position for someone who needs to write. So if you think about that, each of those, it's like, you have to take that time to kind of work through each part of the step, and you as an executive, I mean, for a lot of people, this is like, if you're fairly senior, these things have already been thought of a long time ago. But I think in remote work, even if that's actually pretty well established, I'm really surprised at the number of companies, even larger companies, who just simply don't think of it like that. Like they have all these positions, but they don't actually measure those type of things, because each of those are going to change the behaviors. As you get that information coming in, you're going to change the behavior quite radically. So just the first thing of when you don't ask your HR person hey, how's it going on that job search? No, it's like you look at the dashboard, which is showing, okay, so how many job boards did you put this into? Oh, great, that by the number of units that you delivered there. And then how many units did you do in this week? Oh, I did 60 units, and that's broken down into 1 on the job description, 10 on the job boards, and then all the rest of the 49 things on reviewing CVs, or resumes, however you plan it, however you decided to work that out. So that kind of thinking is going to allow you to look at the things in a way that you can more determine what actions you want to take, and then also that you can kind of look and see well, how's the quality of those kind of things? And then typically that quality like score becomes more and more important as you actually get towards the end of that particular, of whatever that output is. So you create those inputs, and then the work that needs to go into it. Like for example, like I could see that one person in HR, that like their effectiveness in finding good people versus another is quite, it can be quite significantly different. The more junior a person is, the more naive they are, the more that they like are, I don't know, kind of like hope, how would you say, like kind of a bit too optimistic about people. Like they're a little bit too believing that everybody is great at everything type thing. They usually just will allow in almost anybody into the organization. But people who are more discerning and who are a bit more who typically are a little bit more pessimistic with things, and who are a little bit more challenging and questioning, they typically will do a better job at finding better people. So, but then that thing of when someone comes in, and then the amount of time, like after 90 days, or even you can see it usually after 2 weeks, when someone comes in and actually starts working in your systems, like within a very short time period, you'll see whether that person was a good hire. And then of course you take the surveys from the managers as kind of the ultimate quality control of that process. So if you're coming back and doing all of this work, and then you've got like a failing rate where you've got like under 50% of people who are after 30 days are saying, who the managers are saying these people are really not good, and then at 90 days basically they'll have left, or it'll be like really become big issues within the organization. Like then you've got this feedback to say, okay, well, we don't need to like reinvent our entire process. We need to just look at those inputs, and we need to look at the places to where those things, where is it that we're probably failing, and that's probably in the definition of the job. That's the one place, and then like the translation, kind of like the connection of the definition of the job and the CV review. That's probably where we're letting in a lot of people who shouldn't be there. But then very much that the people who get interviewed, and like how structured your process is, and whether you have some kind of practical exercise, and then some kind of cultural fit thing on there. Like those type of things are all where then you have to refine and start experimenting and changing the behavior inside of them based on the different things. So like business is complex, and there's a lot of these different areas, but that I think that's an example of just how you have to look at the inputs and the outputs of what you're doing. Is that this is an input to that. The output is eventually like these interviews, and then like a hired employee is it further output, and then from that output there's a quality that's associated with it, and that quality informs the beginning of the system. And whoever's managing that, like as long as you've got any type of hiring that's fairly consistent, like if you're hiring maybe even 2 or 3 people a year, even then you want those kind of systems set up. And if you don't, the only place where you might not want that set up is like you just don't have an HR person, and you just like you really, because as a senior person, you're not going to be that better. If you're a remote executive at a very small company, like you probably are not that good at hiring people, just unfortunately. I don't think I'm particularly good at hiring people. I think that give me some time to work with somebody, and absolutely I can like figure out whether the person is good or not, but I'm not that good at like actually doing that whole process. So I really rely on people better than me for that process. But I'm good at setting up the process and then looking at what's coming through it and trying to give some my insights into where I think that system can be improved and what kind of changes need to be done inside of it. So but I hope that's a good example of how this input and output system works. That's just one, and I'll probably do quite a few more of them because I think that's helpful. I think from what I've seen from a small company standpoint, there's like, when you're dealing with 4 or 5 people, and you may need a next one, like getting everybody involved and really just doing like this very kind of in-depth conversation with people, and like it's fine. You don't really need to invent a whole system and spend a ton of time on like getting that into a big system yet. But just as soon as you're starting to get to like 7 or 8 people, where it starts to be a full team, and you've got somebody who's like kind of responsible for people things, absolutely at that point make sure that system exists. and as you grow, just like, keep refining it. And remember, it's better just to set up a real crap system at the beginning that is a system, than nothing at all and trying to make it perfect. Just do some garbage at front, get the main pieces in place, have thought through it, and then as you start to get your iterations in there and you start to do your reps inside of it, then you'll just improve it. And then after you've hired hundreds of people, then you'll start to get something really refined. I think as a bigger organization, like what I've seen working at companies with tens of thousands of employees like Sony or Levi's and those ones, like they have their processes, I generally think, are really poor. I think they're really, like, for the most part, I think that like a lot of those companies have really, really crap processes. I think they focus on a lot of times on the wrong things. I think it's a lot because people don't really want to sit down and really like measure those things. Like I had never seen quality scores in the HR process on almost anything at any level except for at Trilogy Software. But everywhere else it was just kind of like the people in HR were typically, sorry to say, they're typically thought very poorly of, like it just is kind of like people with no math skills, where to put them. And so those processes, like, and I see that over and over again when I've applied for jobs, not over and over, but when I have had to apply for jobs, like, how many people even answer? Like, how many people are you even getting a reply back? Like, or it takes like months and months. Eventually, when they're finished with the process, they don't even bother to send you a message. At my company, we were very fast to let people know that we weren't going forward with them because we had a very well organized system. So all of these things were measured. So one of the feedback that we had from people was that the interview process was just like that whole process, even for people who didn't get the job, was great because we just like organized it well, and the people within that worked within there were tracking each of those parts, and they could say one of the things that they thought was important was to let people know that they didn't get the job or were not moving forward, and that they still had a really good experience with them. And so because we had quality checks on those and things, so I would say you could just get better and better and better at those. I think every organization at every size should be looking at the inputs and outputs, and as an executive, you should, as you don't have to do that work most of the time, you should be looking at the managers you're working for and require that from them, or do the thinking yourself. And then, like, a lot of times as a CEO, I just had to like figure that out. Like, this is what it's going to be. Here you go, do that. And then they implement it poorly, and then you're like, awesome, great. Let's do another iteration. Let's do another rep. Let's keep working on it and then see what works and doesn't work. And then eventually people will start to get the idea, and then they're going to like, the lights will come on, and they're going to actually start improving that process because they've got like this really nice framework. And then for everybody who comes into it, it's like, this is how we do things. Work within those structures. If you feel like you've got something that you can really revolutionize it, great. Let's test that congruently in another pipeline, but do that. So I think I'm a bit maybe all over the place too much on this, but I think that for me, it's probably one of the most important things and most interesting parts of really getting a business to work very efficiently. And I think I would say that for me as an executive, the biggest challenge for that is knowing which area to focus on. Like, you got to set this up in every area, but typically, you want to make sure that you've got your product delivery, whatever it is, that area is particularly dialed in. I usually start with people from HR standpoint, just because like you need the best people that you can get to work on that. If you get really good people, then they can help set this up everywhere else. But it's typically something like a basic input output set up on the people part of things, then something very basic on the product delivery, and then something very heavy in the sales and marketing side of things. And then once that's more controlled, like where sales and marketing is more controlled, and like you're able to more control, at least the number of people the number of at bats you're getting, with the sales part of things, then you should really spend the majority of the time on the product delivery side of things. So like just getting that product to be as good as it can, and then to try to figure out all the inputs and outputs inside of there. And that from a remote company, I think you have a big advantage that you've just got like a lot more quiet time, a lot more time that you can think about it, a lot less interruptions. And I think it's a lot easier from my experience, it's easier to turn people over that can't work this way. I think it's easier to slot people in, because I think the nature of freelance work and the nature of kind of like remote work, people kind of understand that there's going to be some of these structures. I think any company that isn't doing this and then implements it is probably going to lose most of their people. That's been my experience whenever I kind of start doing this. People who are used to working in this feel goody, trust me bro type way, like they usually leave because they like, now I've got to work, and then eventually they might look back and think, oh, that actually wasn't so bad. But the transition is very hard for most people to do, just because it's like, you're really going to be accountable, and you're really going to start, we're going to be able to see that you're working. You're really not going to be able to spend even a day without producing results. And because we're going to see it, we're going to just see that there's one day that there's no result. And then on the weekly calls and things like that, it'll be like clear that you just didn't do anything. And then people usually get quite, they run away from that if they're not hard workers. So anyway, I hope that that's helpful. I hope that's something that which can be interesting. Let me know if, like, does your company do that? Do you have something? Have you seen that before? It's the high performance management book was supposed to be, I mean, it was really, really popular for a long time. I don't know if that's I doubt that that's continued in a lot of companies. I don't think that even in some of the most high performance companies that they necessarily do it that way. But if you're in a remote company and they really are a high performance company, how are they organizing things for you? I would love to hear about it from you. All right. Bye.